Welcome everyone to the second game of the Maharashtra Challenge 2023. The first game of the classical section went to Vidit as he won a beautiful positional game. The second one, now Peter has to strike back. He has the white pieces and opens with 1c4, the English opening. And you can see Vidit there, extremely focused. That's how he does it before the game. He tries to spend time connecting himself with something. He has some ideas, some thoughts, and he wants to get into the best mindset. And before he does that, he doesn't make a move, and then he has it e6 on the board. Knight comes out to c3 for Peter, and Vidit is going to play the Queen's Gambit declined. He plays d5. Now the question is, does Peter want to go d4? Yes, he does, without much thought, because he is essentially not a d4 player. So in a way, Vidit has managed to take him in a territory that is slightly uncomfortable for him. c5, the Tarrasch defense, and this is now very popular these days, especially the Dubov Tarrasch, which has been played by Daniel Dubov, Magnus Carlsen, everyone. So c takes d5 played. Now c takes d4 is the Henning Shara gambit, which does not happen. Vidit simply recaptures back the pawn, and Peter brings his knight out. The Tarrasch defense was championed by Garry Kasparov in the 1980s or 90s, and he was a very big exponent of it. Black gets an isolated pawn on d5 generally, and white tries to positionally outmaneuver black. Now knight comes out to f6, g3 is the main line, but as we mentioned, that would lead to the Dubov Tarrasch, and Peter wants something where Vidit is not all prepped up. So that's why he goes bishop g5, but Vidit is also well prepared here. He puts his bishop on e6. Now, one of the main moves in this position is e4, but Peter goes for e3, and this has been one of his strategies, that he doesn't want to go into purely theoretical lines because he knows that Vidit is very well prepared in those territories. Now, for Vidit, there are some options. He can develop normally, or he can push his pawn to c4, which he does. Now, it will no longer be an isolated queen pawn position. So with c4, he has gained space and he has limited white. Bishop e2 makes a lot of sense to develop your bishop and castle. But Peter decides to go g3, and he's like, I'm going to put my bishop on g2. I'm going to castle, bring my knight to e5, and then put pressure on the d5 pawn. That's how he wants to do it. Vidit brings his bishop out to b4. Very ambitious move. And now there are few ideas. Queen can jump to a5. Once this pin is broken, the knight can come to e4. So already Peter has to be careful how to continue. You can see there he plays bishop g2, but this is essentially a pawn sacrifice. Now Vidit can continue with knight bd7, which is a fine move, but why not take advantage of the fact that the king is still in the center, and he does it. He takes on c3, and the point is, now after b takes c3, which will happen, he wants to go with his queen to a5, and this is a very important moment, because once he does that, and I'm sure Vidit is going to do it, yes he does, queen a5. Now his plan is next move knight e4, hitting the bishop and the pawn. So if you play a move like rook c1, you are going to be in trouble after knight e4. So that's the reason why Peter takes on f6. Very interesting. And he is ready to sacrifice a pawn, because now Vidit can take on c3 with a check, which he does. Queen takes c3 check. And now knight d2 instantly played. He brings his knight back, and Vidit will recapture back the bishop on f6. Let's take stock of what has happened here. Castles by white. Black is a pawn up, but his pawns are doubled. Also his king is in the center, and white is saying that I have compensation. But on the other hand, remember that this c4 pawn is a passer and a protected passer. So you have to be careful. rook c1 played, and as Peter mentioned after the game that he had completely missed at some point that Vidit could go queen d3 here. For Vidit, playing his queen to d3 was a slightly stressful matter because he was afraid of this move queen e1. And the idea is that this knight comes to e4 and then rook c3 traps the queen. So say something like f5, then knight takes c4 and rook c3 possible. And if you play something like castles, then knight e4, d e4 and rook c3 is slightly stressful there because the rook is trapped, but maybe you can just give queen is trapped, you can just give up your queen and play it this way with these passed pawns. So that's the reason why Vidit taking his time before playing his queen to d3, because queen e1 is definitely a problem, but he does it anyway. He actually is fine after taking quite a bit of time. He puts his queen on d3, and Peter now has to decide, will he go queen e1 actually, which is an interesting idea, but he goes e4. He pushes his pawn to e4. Now for Vidit here, the safest idea is to take here. And the point is, after bishop e4, queen takes d4, and let's say a move like knight c4 here, you take on d1, rook takes d1, and then just king e7, and black is doing very fine. So for Vidit, d takes e4 is the correct move here, which will also fit into his match situation, especially because he has won the first game. But Vidit is getting a bit tempted because there is a very interesting idea with long castle. And the point of long castle is that the d4 pawn would become terribly weak, and that would be something. For now, Vidit cannot take here because after e takes d5, bishop d5, there is rook e1 check and it gets very nasty. Oh, Vidit is going for long castle. He is going to do it. Risky chess here, long castle, but this is based on a miscalculation and we are going to talk about it. It's actually a very, very deep thing and you're going to learn a lot out of this. So firstly, Peter takes on d5 and he tells Vidit, okay, now you need to recapture, otherwise you're going to lose a piece. So Vidit must take back, bishop takes d5. And this is where the shocker is going to come. You can pause here and think, what did Peter do here? Look at him. He's just making sure his calculations are accurate. He takes on c4. What a nice sacrifice. Now the first and foremost important question is, what happens to bishop takes c4? Isn't that a free piece? Well, the point is here, you play the move queen a4, attacking the bishop twice. And now if the bishop moves, the knight on c6 is attacked this way as well. But black has the move bishop b5. And after queen takes a7, which is very, very logical, because now the knight cannot take it, it is pinned here. It feels like white has a strong attack, but here black goes queen takes d4, and actually Peter analyzed this position till some point, and then he said, oh, nothing's happening, because if I go a check here, then he comes up, then I go a check here, he comes here, and I'm simply a piece down. Nothing's happening. But here is the amazing move that you have to see. Try to pause the video and think, what would you play here? Well, the move is rook to c5. What a move this is. And now you have all sorts of threats like queen b6 coming up. The rook comes up here. There is a lot of pressure. And for Vidit, he realizes that rook d7 could be a possible move. But then after queen b6 threatening rook takes b5, queen takes b5, you take on f1, c6 is hanging, and you need to find all sorts of accurate moves here in order to just survive, like king d8, bishop d7, queen d7, king f1, and white is slightly better. So this rook c5 move is such an unbelievable variation here of knight takes c4. So we come back to this position after knight takes c4. You can see Vidit is unhappy. He's like, oh my god, I should have taken on e4 before when the chance was there, because going into this line means this would be too risky, and that's the reason why you don't want to go here. Vidit has to make a decision now what to do. this is too risky. Queen d4, rook c5. And also the point to note here is that bishop takes f1 absolutely doesn't work because of bishop c6. The black king is completely toasted in the center there. So, and that's the reason why Vidit now picks up the queen. But it's, you know, the thing is, it's a small compromise here. After rook d1, it's white who is pressing. It's equal pawns. The structure is better for white. However, Vidit has a chance to win material here. King b8. And notice his plan is bishop takes g2, king takes g2, and take the pawn on d4. Peter is like, okay, I'm fine with it. I'm going knight to e3. I'm attacking your bishop with it. Come, take this bishop, then take this pawn. I'm fine with it. That's not a problem, because then I will play on your kingside structure. Bishop g2. King takes g2. And Vidit has to snatch the pawn on d4. It makes complete sense, because then you have something to show for your weaknesses. Now, here, this is a very instructive position. Why? Because even though white is a pawn down, he's better. The reason is these pawns are weak. And if you play a move like rook c5 here, by the way, rook c5 is a tremendous move here. It's a great move. It's a very nice, strong move. The idea is that you will shift your rook to h5 perhaps, or you may even later on, you know, start pushing your pawns on the king side. If either one of these pawns falls on the king side, then white is just going to be in trouble. Black is going to be in trouble, because he will then have to take care of this majority. Meanwhile, black's majority is very difficult to mobilize, because white's pawn on a2 stops them for now. So Peter's understanding of this position is so good. He understands that in spite of the fact he's pawn down, he can still press a bit, and this shows his class. He goes knight g4, which is a fine move. He is putting pressure on the f pawn. Now, rook d6 is possible, but so is f5. And then after knight e5, Vidit has to find this very strong move, knight e2, which is not at all easy to find. And so Vidit may go just rook d6, defending his f6 pawn. He's taking his time there on the clock. Vidit has lesser time than Peter, but you know, time is not a big factor because the position has simplified quite a bit. Rook d6 played. Logical move. But now white can regain back his pawn. He can take on f6 here. Rook takes f6. Rook takes d4. And then we have a very interesting rook endgame, which most likely and objectively should be a draw. But Peter comes back, and will he go for this? That is the question, because he can also say, I don't want to immediately cash in. I'll go rook c5 and I'll keep the pressure flowing. But he takes it. He takes on f6, and he thinks that there are slight chances perhaps in that endgame. For Vidit, it's actually a good thing that we are going into this rook endgame with equal pawns. Rook takes d4, but with a small imbalance. White has a kingside majority, black has a queenside majority. Rook comes to c8, very logical move to free up the king, takes the rook, and now we are not in a double rook endgame, but just a pure single rook endgame. King takes c8. And this was Peter's idea, g4. And he says that he wants to go g5, then h4, then f4, then king comes up and start pushing his pawns very quickly. For Vidit now, there is no time to waste. No, king c7 is not such a good move. You know, you could have just started pushing your pawns on the queen side, but he sort of hesitates a bit, and Peter is just boom, boom, boom. He's like, I'm going to push my pawns. Goes g5. Now, the best move here, without a doubt, is rook f5. The rook is actively positioned there, but Vidit makes another passive move. He goes rook g6. Somehow, in this rook endgame, the first two moves by Vidit have been not at all good. This move, king c7 and rook g6. Now, the rook is passive. Vidit, however, had an idea. Another mistake, and I think the final big mistake of the game, h6. He should have started off with f6. because then after f4 you take and play h6, and that would be good. Or if your opponent plays f takes g6, then you can let it be and move your rook away. But he went h6 and Peter went f4. The pawn is taken on g5, and now what do you recapture with? Do you take with the f pawn or the h pawn? He takes with the f pawn here. The main point is that h takes would be equal after f6. So taking here with the f pawn is the correct decision. But now the idea is that after f6, Svidler has a great plan. And you will notice it. King g3 played, bringing the king up. And once Vidit takes on g5, which is his idea, White is not going to recapture. White is simply going to push his pawn ahead very calmly. And now, even though you are a pawn down in this endgame, White is close to winning. How? Because the king is coming up. Pawn is pushing forward. This king cannot come this side because the rook has cut him off. And this is turning into a completely winning endgame. Wow. King g4, king c6 from absolutely nowhere. Peter Svidler has converted this into a winning position for himself. h6, very calmly now, getting the work done. With it trying to activate his queenside pawns, but I think he's just a bit too late now. King h5 played, and well, the idea is to play h7 and king comes up. a5 played, and now h7. Well, one of the points is that after rook here, I can go king h6, king c5, rook g4, b4, and now rook takes g5, king c4, but then the a5 pawn would hang. So somehow magically it's all working out. Vidit goes rook b8, and I really like this next move, rook g4. This is so clinical. If you go king c5, I'll take on g5 and play rook g8. So that's the reason why Vidit goes b4. But now the very important point here to note is that after Peter takes the pawn on g5, it's not only that he's won a pawn and threatening rook g8, but also he's cut the king off on the 4th rank here. So what happens here is that in any endgame, these pawns are not going to be very useful. King comes up to h6, a4, and the point is that after king g7, you have to resign, because after take, there's no way the king is coming up. And if you play b3, I take, come back with my rook and win this pawn. And this cutoff here by the rook is very powerful on the 4th rank. And so Vidit has to resign the game, and that is what he does. Peter has played a brilliant game here with that tactic knight takes c4, deep calculations, and with its not so great endgame play helps him to equalize the match.